I must tell you, I'm pretty frustrated with some things that are going on in our country right now. You may think that I'm referring to President Trump, the impeachment, or equal rights, or many other things that you've heard about. But it's actually none of that I'm really frustrated with. I am frustrated with the fact that the liberal left is hijacking America's youth. I'm your host, Jared Dyson, and this is the Closet Conservative Podcast. So I'll go ahead and say this week's episode is probably going to be a little bit different than some others because I'm pretty frustrated. I'm going to try to explain what's taking place and why it's got me frustrated. You know, I've known for quite some time that the left is out to hijack the youth of our country. Now, a lot of people might try to say that's a conspiracy theory or that I'm out doing something or saying something that's not necessarily true, but stay with me this week. Listen to what I have to say. I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people in my area, and, you know, I've talked about some concerns that I've had with school curriculum and other things that are taking place. As I researched, I found back in the Clinton administration, there was a lot of changes in education that took place. The way history was taught was changed. We transitioned to a more politically correct society. All those things they maintained throughout the Bush administration, but near the end of his administration, something changed. I mean, it was a big, drastic change. Well, what had taken place was all of those kids that grew up in the 90s under the Clinton administration and throughout the end of the Bush administration, they had been indoctrinated and full of liberalism. I mean, that's all they had received. Now they were in high school and college. They were coming to voting age, and they go to college and they continue this liberal assault on their minds, completely robbing these kids of their youth. While it's really concerning, it's becoming more and more prevalent and it's becoming more accepted in our society. So I want to preface my next statement here. I'm definitely not calling Democrats Nazis or anything of the sort, but the actions that the left has taken regarding the youth of our country is very similar to Nazi Germany in the 1920s. The Nazis targeted the youth with their propaganda, and it changed the entire viewpoint of the people that were in the country. Over at the National Holocaust Museum, they have a great write-up talking about the Hitler Youth and how the teachers were unable to actually teach what they should teach, education, and they were forced to teach state authority, militarism, racism, anti-Semitism. I mean, sure, now I know our schools are probably not necessarily seeking to teach racism or militarism, but they are teaching our children values that do not align with traditional American values. I mean, if you study traditional America, it was a Christian nation. It was built on Judeo-Christian values. But now our kids are taught an all-accepting, all-inviting, live-as-you-wish mentality, and it's just not what we were founded on as a country. But it's just not enough that they've hijacked the kids from the time they entered school. They've actually attacked every component of a child's life now. I think back about when I was growing up, and I think most everyone listening to this podcast can probably recall the show Sesame Street. I mean, whether you grew up with the show, you're familiar with the show. I mean, you probably didn't just roll out from underneath a rock yesterday. That show launched back in the late 60s, and it was built on the premise of teaching early education to preschool and young children. But now the left has fought to have Bert and Ernie to be thought of as a same-sex couple. I mean, back in 2018, one of the writers came out and said that he was actually writing as if those best friends were something more than best friends. Now, in the show, they never pushed the idea more than just the thought process and the suggestions, but it goes a little bit further to show that there's other issues. I think back about in 2016, there was a writer named Brian Moylan. He proposed that the children's Christmas cartoon Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer, that it was full of gay subtext. Moylan went into a long description of the movie. He attempted to justify how the entire movie was written with LGBTQ undertones. He described Hermie and Cornelius from the show as homosexuals. He is trying to tie any sort of meaning to the homosexual agenda. I mean, he would take a small character, a small situation, a small circumstance, and he would try to say that it's an underlying homosexual tendency or tone and try to help justify the position of the left that is outside the normal mainstream foundation of our country. So it happened again earlier this year, but a little more direct. Earlier this year, the children's show Arthur opened its season with a same-sex wedding. The left obviously celebrated this as a win for acceptance. It was celebrated as a win for LGBTQ rights. It was a push towards teaching children about acceptance. But it didn't just stop there this year. I mean, I read an article just this week, and it happened in the Disney Plus streaming service. I mean, the service has not even been out just a little over a month. And now there's a focus on teens. High School Musical was a popular movie series for Disney, and they created High School Musical as a TV series on their streaming service. And now it features a gay romance. From the time a child is old enough to understand what they are seeing on a television, the left is targeting them with propaganda. There are more and more examples of this happening, but I simply don't have time to cover them in the time that we have here. But what I do want to say is it's absolutely sickening what's taking place with the youth of our country. Maybe you want to say that I'm just attacking the LGBTQ agenda. I mean, maybe you want to say that I'm just picking on them, I'm singling them out, but that's not the case either. The left has shown they're not interested in leaving out any part of their agenda from brainwashing the youth. I mean, a great example of that is Greta Thunberg. Greta, if you remember, is the 16-year-old Swedish climate change activist, and this week she won Time's Person of the Year. Think back, she's the one who blasted the UN with a speech back in September. She complained about how she would be, or how she should be, back in school, but the left was bringing her to bring hope to the world leaders at that UN summit. She made the statement, "You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words." She talked about how people were dying and ecosystems were collapsing and that mass extinction would soon come to the world. You know, it was just some of that typical left-wing rhetoric. No doubt she's been fed this garbage since her youth. One thing she did say that was true, the left has stolen her dreams in her childhood. I mean, she should be out there allowed to chase her hopes and dreams just like I was in my youth, but instead she's being driven around and all over the world being stunted for propaganda for the liberal left. Now, of course, there's some out there that may be listening that'll say, okay, well, she's not a U.S. teen. I mean, how can our liberal left be affecting her? Well, I wrote an article just a couple weeks ago about an activist who was volunteering to teach a class out in Sacramento. Rather than teaching art history as she was supposed to, the teacher decided to teach Black Lives Matters, and that the kids were to create signs for art history supporting the Black Lives Matters movement. I don't know about you, that doesn't seem much like art history to me. Or maybe you can think about a blog post by Tom Rademacher, and it was posted in May of 2018 at a website called Education Post, where he said he was liberal and all of his students knew it. He shared how he would come and tell his students that everyone is racist and teach everyone about Black Lives Matters. I know some school teachers, and they've shared how their curriculum is focused on teaching things from that liberal viewpoint. Some of them stand up and teach the truth, but a lot of them don't because they fear for their jobs and they succumb to that liberal agenda and teach just what they have to maintain their employment. Rather than encouraging the youth to chase those dreams, the left has tried to mobilize the youth to be more active and change the country. I mean, politicians like Bernie Sanders have fed them lies for years that they have it so horrible, that America is such a horrible place. They lived through those Obama apology tours. They heard how Americans are horrible. Now, I'm sure some of them have had some horrible things happen in their youth. Not all of them have grown up in nice homes, but they all have grown up in a free country with the ability to chase their hopes and dreams, until the left became involved. Now they are being instructed to chase the dreams of Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They are being told they deserve a living wage, yet they don't understand that the majority of Americans worked hard to get to a living wage. They are told that they deserve free health care, not understanding that there is not one single thing in our country that comes for free. Schools are not teaching kids to be smart and productive on their own. They are teaching kids to be submissive and obedient. Now, if you think back, that obviously worked for Hitler. As one writer put it, schools are progressively indoctrinating children because they are smothering independent thought and stifling intellectual development. Man, that is a loaded statement, but it is so true. Students are not taught to think or process things, but rather hear what they are told, accept it, and move on. Think about just a topic such as Common Core math. I was discussing this recently with a friend of mine, and the right answer is not what the focus of the problem is. The focus is on the method by which you arrive at the answer. If you use an appropriate process, well, it doesn't matter if you get the answer right or wrong, you are given credit for that answer. This type of environment creates the scenario when thinking is non-existent. Rather than someone thinking independently to come up with a correct answer, the person can simply say what they think the process should be, pass along an opinion, and get credit. No one has the right answer, but everyone around gives their opinion, and guess what? When that happens, the strongest opinion wins. I don't know about you, but that certainly sounds a lot like the liberals, doesn't it? I mean, if you really think about it, just look at this for just a moment. They don't know what to do with President Trump. So the younger progressive crowd comes in and says, let's impeach him. Why? Well, because we don't like him. He's not nice. He's evil. I mean, they've really made a lot of noise about President Trump. They got an extremely large following on social media of mindless youth that can't think on their own. So rather than thinking through the process, seeing what's going on and making a logical decision on their own, the youth are simply following AOC and the squad toward the cliff of socialism. While Democrats want to claim that President Trump is the greatest crisis facing our country, the truth is that the lack of independent thinkers and the lack of intellectual ability is the real crisis. We need people that are able to think logically and rationally. We need people that understand that just because I feel a certain way doesn't mean that it's the right way. This starts by teaching our children and youth how to do this. You can't rely on the school system to teach them this. I don't care if you are in inner city Manhattan or the most rural education system in the country. The school system is not where this change is going to take place. This change is going to have to come from some intellectual thinkers at home, some thinkers that are willing to teach their children and show them that it's not a bad thing to make your own choices.
This is the Closet Conservative Podcast. All material copyright The Closet Conservative. Music courtesy of Greg Shields Music. Remember to subscribe to our podcast to receive all the latest episodes. We can also be found online at closetconservative.net or on Facebook and Twitter.